My second text is one that many of you will know. It's the poem by Yeats, The Second Coming, from 1919. The most famous passage, again, probably some of you can recite it with me. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere, the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. What I want to claim here in my concluding remarks, the concluding part of my remarks, is that this contradiction between pro-fascism and anti-fascism, this apparent tension, is part of a larger policy which has been loosed upon you and from which you are suffering, and in which I think you are suffering. It's part of a larger policy of making things fall apart. There isn't much of a Russian proposal for a better Europe. There is, however, a Russian strategy for making the Europe that exists fall apart. And many of you have encountered its symptoms in a number of ways. Supporting client states inside the European Union, supporting separatism from the European Union, or separatism within European states, supporting right-wing populism inside the European Union member states, at the extreme supporting fascism, fascists and neo-Nazis inside the European Union, and perhaps most deeply, providing a political theory about how things should fall apart. Because of course, the way, and you'll correct me if you want, but the way that the European Union works, the fundamental political logic of the European Union, is that there's a positive relationship between civil society, sovereignty, and integration. Civil society helps sovereignty, integration helps sovereignty. Where a sovereign state is weak, civil society can help, European integration can also help. The Russian proposition is to take away integration and to take away civil society and leave sovereignty all by itself. That's a different political theory. It has a certain logic, and it can be very effective. But it's a different political theory. It's not a version of the one that all Europeans have grown up with, and its consequences are taking things apart. The European Union at the top, states in the middle, if it's not the Russian state, and civil society at the bottom. Now, what's the relationship between this and this business of rehabilitating the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? The relationship is that pro-fascist anti-fascism, or supporting the right while being the right, which is a very odd thing, supporting the right while claiming not to be the right, I mean, supporting the right while claiming to be the left, is an example of something which is going on at the level of propaganda. And this is really the last thing I want to say. Let me repeat Yeats. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Let me repeat Grudzinski. A personality which is divided into its component parts. In a fundamental way, I think this is what propaganda is all about. And by Russian propaganda, I mean the things which have worked their way, directly or indirectly, into the way that we talk about Ukraine, and therefore about Europe, and therefore about ourselves. There are very standard forms of propaganda, making things up. There's the form of propaganda which I think of as cacophony. That is, if Nemtsov is murdered, then you claim it was the Ukrainians, you claim it was the Chechens, you claim it was the Islamic fundamentalists, you claim it was the opposition itself, you claim it was the American Secret Services, and by the time you've made all of these claims, it becomes harder to talk about what actually happened. There's political marketing, another very important kind of propaganda, where, for example, you tell some people that Ukrainians are all anti-Semitic, and then you tell other people that Ukraine is part of the international Jewish conspiracy, depending upon your market. And what I'm trying to say is that the contradiction of this is part of the point. The propaganda which has been loosed upon you, and with which the German press and German intellectuals have so earnestly engaged in the last year, is meant to be contradictory. It's meant to make it impossible to think. If I say, as Russian propaganda has said, that there is no Ukrainian state, but the Ukrainian state is oppressive, there's no Ukrainian nation, but all Ukrainians are nationalists, there's no Ukrainian language, but Russians are being forced to speak it, right? And if I'm a pro-fascist, anti-fascist, I am filling your minds with things that contradict. And the worrying thing is how little we have noticed this. And what I'm trying to claim is that there's a syndrome here in which this thing that we might dismiss as propaganda has actually engaged our minds, all of our minds in the West. And that in this sense, and it's a very important sense, the Kremlin is certainly winning. So this is the thought with which I want to leave you. It's a year after the Maidan. There are many critical things one can say about what's happened in Ukraine since the Maidan. There are many ways in which Russia has won the war in Ukraine. But here's a surprising point of comparison. In the last year, and I believe I'm speaking now from the Kremlin's point of view, in the last year, things in Ukraine have gone much worse than expected. Kharkiv is still in Ukraine. Odessa, still in Ukraine. Even a good deal of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts are still in Ukraine. There's no way the Russian offensive was about getting bits of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts in the Crimea. It was much, much more ambitious than that. Things have gone for the Russians worse in Ukraine than they've expected. But the propaganda tactics that were applied to you, that were applied to Europe, these have worked much better than expected. And as a result, what were the tactics have become the strategy. What were the tactics have become the strategy. At the beginning, what was about Ukraine with a European propaganda campaign is now about Europe, with Ukraine just being a small aspect. So Europe has proven to be a softer target than Ukraine. I wish I could leave you with more hopeful words than that, but my goal is to think, and that's where these thoughts bring me. Thank you very much.